Is it possible to sell in Asia Pacific with your product and other resources being primarily in English? Well, the answer is it can be, but it really depends on a couple of things. Stay with us to find out more. I'm Philip Lempa from APEC Virtual Selling, where we help companies sell more SaaS by leveraging modern virtual selling strategies. So you're wondering whether it is possible to expand your SaaS solution into one or a couple of markets in Asia Pacific with your product and your company in general, most of the resources being English focused. So I need to start by saying that expanding to another country is always a rather big and then complex thing to consider. However, what I'll be doing in this video is providing a simplified framework to think about that expansion and whether you can do it with your resources. But of course, this video could be a couple of hours long and there's a lot that goes into it. So in my experience, whether you could be successful taking your product that is primarily English focused and selling it in a new market in Asia Pacific, whether you can do that, whether you can be successful doing that, boils down to two things. One, can your product be pretty much used as is in that new market by the end users, or does it require some kind of localization effort? And I will speak more as to what really localization is in a second. And two, whether you effectively can market and conduct a sales cycle in that Asia Pacific country using primarily English. All right, so let's start with the first one, which is whether your product can be pretty much used as is in that market that you're trying to sell into, or do you have to make localization adjustments? So in terms of localization and adjustments, what do we mean here? So first of all, that would be the language of the product itself, right? So, when you use the product, in this example, by default, your product would be in English. Can it be used in English in the market where you're trying to sell, or do you might have to tweak the language there? So this will of course depend on the country and even the demographic that you're selling into your end users within that country. So for instance, there's a number of countries in the Asia Pacific region where English is really the main language or de facto main language. So for instance, you have Australia, New Zealand, you have Singapore. These places you can definitely expect for the most part from your end users to be able to comfortably and successfully use a tool that is in English. Then on the other hand, at the other side, you will have countries where, other than some more niched cases, for the most part, it is really not reasonable to expect a larger scale adoption of a tool that's all in English. So for instance, there'll be mainland China, Japan, or South Korea. And this really depends market by market, right? So the exception to what I just said would be the Hong Kong market within China. Well, I suppose I did say mainland China. Anyway, Hong Kong market, where really English is an official language, and you can reasonably expect your end users to be able to easily use a solution that is in English. You then also have countries that are in between the two groups that I just mentioned, which I've worked with, and I found it very interesting in that, for instance, in these markets, it really depends on the type of solution, your product, and the demographic that will be using it. So for instance, a DevOps tool in Malaysia or Indonesia that is in English in my experience, for the most part, that shouldn't be an issue. However, a warehouse management software that needs to be used on a warehouse level, of course, would require, if you want good adoption, an adjustment in terms of offering the local language. So the language of the product itself, that is just the first layer of localization. You might have additional layers that you will need to look at depending on what kind of product you sell. So a good example here of the other layers would be if you have a successful payroll platform in a country like the US and you take it to another English-speaking country, like let's say Australia. The language itself, no issue. However, there are all these other layers in terms of localization, like tax law, labor law, payment processes, all that would need to be adjusted if you want to sell that product in a place like Australia. So that's a bit of an extreme example. You can have something in between that and a product that you can just start using like that in another country, which would be, for instance, let's say a recruitment platform, right? So for the most part, how things work can be very similar, but it might need to be adjusted for certain aspects of hiring law, labor law related to hiring in a country we're trying to sell, or let's say if something like integration with the local job boards is something that you need to look at, that might need to be tweaked as well. So a fairly complex concept, but I hope that gives you an idea, can get you thinking about what potentially needs to be done depending on your product in terms of localizing that for a country in Asia Pacific where you'll be trying to sell, right? And really depending on that country, your product, and even the demographic that you'll be selling into in terms of your end user, that will dictate whether you can just sell it like that, whether there's some little tweaks you might need to do, or whether there would be some really major tweaks that don't really make it sustainable to try to sell into that particular market, right? Because then you need to also consider your competition, etc. At the moment, we're even doing that in a vacuum, not considering a competitive environment. The second thing to consider is whether you'd be able to market and sell to a country that you're trying to expand into in Asia Pacific using your resources that would be primarily in English. So again, here, this would be a spectrum of countries/markets in Asia Pacific where you could be able to market and sell using those resources that are English centric. So for instance, places like Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Hong Kong, to a certain degree Malaysia, you can do a lot with your existing English centric marketing and sales resources. Again, depending on your product, Philippines could certainly be part of that list as well. And then on the other hand, you'll have countries where it is really difficult to do that with just English centric resources. So, again, China, Japan, Korea, Thailand, etc. Right? So you really do need local language for the most part for marketing and sales. What might make sense in those markets, and again, you'd have to think about number one, which was whether the end users can use your product in English and whether there's other localization required. But in those, if that's a yes, potentially, in those markets that I just mentioned, potentially you can look at utilizing a more indirect sales strategy. So try to engage the partner community, find good partners there that could assist you with the marketing and with sales, potentially do that on your behalf, so that then you could focus just on the product delivery, if that makes sense. Quite a complex topic. My intention was to simplify it a little bit with a simple framework to get you thinking about it. But if expanding into Asia Pacific, selecting the right market and the right strategy for that market is something that you need help with, definitely get in touch with us.